Hello. Hi, Rodney.
Hi.
How
What's
are you?
happening?
How are you?
Yo, yo, yo. I want to talk about lacrosse balls.
Oh,
You
yes.
know this one.
I do.
Lacrosse balls in the hamstrings,
Mm-hmm.
in the IT band,
Mm-hmm.
hip flexor.
Mm-hmm.
Get it up in the pectorals. That's in the chest.
Mm-hmm.
Get it up in the lats in the back,
Mm-hmm.
and the side of the bat
Mm-hmm.
wing on the
Yeah.
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 Just getting it in there and crushing up some myofascial tissue, breaking up some stuff from sitting too long. Really helping with lower back issues.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I just love my little lacrosse ball. Oh,
Mhm.
standing on.
Mm. Yes.
I'll take
and you
2
did that
lacrosse
the other
balls
day.
and stand on them.
Yeah.
That way you can't cheat and just like take weight
Yeah.
off. It helps with the plantar fasciitis.
Yeah.
The plantar fasciitis,
Yeah.
huh? Well, and
Yeah.
I think some of the theory on it is, when you have an issue like lower back, it's not your back that's the issue. It's
Right.
something upstream, like up your back, or downstream that's causing it.
Yeah.
Which is, there could be something in your back.
Sure.
Your one of your
Totally.
vertebra,
You got to check
one
it
of those
out.
discs, right?
Yeah.
You got to get that looked at.
Yeah.
But it may be coming from
Something else.
something else,
Yes.
and that something else could possibly be.
A lacrosse ball.
Well, I mean, not the
From
issue, but like
massaging it.
fixed by the lacrosse ball. So I just recommend. They're not cheap. I mean, they're like $4 or $5 a piece, unless you get a good pack on Amazon.
It's good.
Do it.
Sounds like fun.
Just do it.
Welcome to, or welcome back to, More in Common. This is our social experiment. See, everyone has a story that can help us learn from one another. And we bring people into this safe space that we have learned to create so we can learn about their stories and get into difficult topics that challenge us in conversation and ultimately how we think.
And we have a lot of these conversations, and we're seeing a lot of similar threads through all of them. So what we're doing is breaking down these conversations to create a set of tools and a map that'll help you become a conversation boss so that you can be a catalyst for conversation in your day-to-day life.
All right, and we always have to remind you, www.moreincommonpod.com. See, I tried to clean up my W's that time. Hopefully it worked. But go check us out. You can find us everything there. If you're feeling punchy, feeling generous, and you want to leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening application, feel free. We'd love it. It gets us more listeners and gets our message out there more. So, again, www.moreincommonpod.com. Now, that being said, Rodney, Nick Jones Jr., tell me what you took away from that episode.
You know what, man? There's nothing wrong with the way you get after those W's. I like it. I like it a lot. And Nick Jones Jr., I mentioned it in the intro to the episode. Story's not done. The story's not over. And keep going. And then to add on to what President Obama told him, pursue your dreams, pursue your goals. Like, keep going. Use the tools that you have at your disposal. He had the GI Bill. He wasn't even using it. And bam, he went to film school, learned to write, did it. Bam, dreams happen. It doesn't always happen like that, but get out, try. Just try. I love that about his story. And yeah. What about you?
Yeah, no, for me, and I look at all my notes from that call, and the overarching theme for me is just the representation of how he is not, we aren't all monoliths, even if we have some sort of demographic that we fall into. He's, a showrunner for Japanime, and he writes, in many different styles, and he, is a Marine, a proud Marine, right? And he's just a dynamic personality that stays true to who he is. And I just love that. And, it really helps, I think, break down some unconscious biases. Like when you think about a Marine, oh, wait, you're a writer too, right? Tell me more about that, and really get to know somebody and for who they are, not just the thing that you think they are. So, I mean, just a just a wonderful person to know, and I'm very glad we had a chance to talk to him. So today we have Q Washington. Tell us about him.
Q has been working with human beings for over 30 years, and he loves almost every second of it. He studied biblical studies at Biola University and completed his AA at Fullerton College. For the last 8 years, he's been able to pour his mind, body, and soul into a frontline relational evangelism ministry in Hollywood called Broken Hearts, where he currently serves as the executive director. Prior to Broken Hearts, he invested his time into various communities in the Los Angeles and Orange County areas, from planting churches in Watts with World Impact to soup kitchens in Costa Mesa with Rock Harbor Church to leading sports camps and youth groups with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. In addition, he is a coach on the USA Traveling Women's Flag Football Network team. That's right, we have a USA Women's Flag Football team, and he's a coach. And he's a coach of the She Unit in the Women's Flag Football Network. He is a kind soul and a great human being, and it is our pleasure to sit down with him and connect. Keith, what did we talk about with Q?
My goodness. I mean, after that bio, you could probably get a good sense of things. But we definitely talk a lot about being a male coach in a women's flag football network, the use of the word girl, which I think is a really interesting part of this conversation. And then, just all of it. And then, of course, we talk a lot about his, Broken Hearts ministry and what it is and what it means to him. And, it's just a great conversation as always. Any observations from this one?
There was a very, we get into a conversation about calling women or girls. And I was very I thought about it when we were talking, and I was like, I want to ask this, but I was like, I don't know how to ask it, and I think I think that's reflective in the way I asked it. Like, it's very uncomfortable. It doesn't just come out because it was not comfortable, and I think sometimes there's questions we got to ask that we want to ask that are just going to be messy, and that's okay. Especially if you're in a space with people that you can trust and that have your interests at heart. So it worked out.
Yeah.
Keith, what conversation tips you going to drop on us for today?
This one I've actually thought a lot about as a result of this episode, but subcultural context, right? So when we're talking about the use of the word girl, it's used within the flag football network, and no one within it is offended. But then we talk a little bit about how if you use it within the corporate culture, you're going to have a different response. And I think having that subcultural context, especially when you're trying to meet people where they are, it's very relevant and something to always keep in mind when you're going to say something or you're receiving something somebody said, and offense may be taken or perceived, right? And then accepting when you're wrong, which falls within that. Like Q says, and you'll hear it, if he were offending someone, he would definitely change, right? So those are just two things when in any conversation, like they become very relevant depending on what it is you're talking about. So,
So I want to come in with observation 2.0. It is also interesting that we're three men talking about it, and I think it's good that we're talking about it. I also want to put a note for me and you to start asking some of our female guests what they think.
Yeah.
Good to get the context from somebody actually actually have an opinion on it, because they might be called both or either.
That's fair. No, it's good. All right. Well,
get after it.
As always, enjoy the show.
Experiencing brokenness, and brokenness, we say, looks differently no matter where you're at. So whether you're housed or home, you can have an experience of brokenness. Whether you're living in addiction or whether you're experiencing mental health concerns, you can experience a bit of brokenness. You could be in a Fortune 500 company and just balling out of your mind, and you could still be experiencing that brokenness. And the common thing for us is that we like to say that we've all experienced some type of brokenness in our life, some way, shape, or form. And yeah, who wouldn't love to have some justice? Ha ha ha. Four, 5, 10, in my case, 20,000 trainings to be able to go, all right, I can grow a little bit there, right? And even after I grow, there's still areas that I need to grow in. I might regress, I might shrink down for, a moment or two in life, but there's still opportunity for it to go. And the only way to do that is to just keep being transparent and available and raw and authentic and right in their face with it.
Here we are, we're back, and we are with Q, Mr. Washington.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's great to be here. I'm glad that I was able to hang with you guys for the next hour or so.
Yeah, I'm glad we got it together. It's kind of weird because I figured we would be doing this together since we're neighbors and all, but sometimes you got to go remote.
Hey, sometimes you got to make it work. Thanks for joining us, though.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Q, you operate a nonprofit that, quite frankly, in just short, right, is built to help the homeless across Los Angeles.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Now, we're going to get to that, right? Instead, let's talk about coaching women's flag football. Okay?
Yeah.
How did you get into it? Tell us more about, like, the ecosystem, the league, the reach. There's a national team that you're coaching on, right? I'm very curious to hear more about your experience getting to this world.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So I guess it really starts in my own career. I played football for quite a long time, all the way throughout college, and I had an opportunity to either kind of transfer over from the Southern California area to go to the University of Miami, or to stay in Southern California, kind of finish out school here, and potentially start what eventually became a nonprofit, which is the nonprofit that I run. And so I opted for the latter, and while I was here, I was at a school called Biola University, and they had a women's flag football and men's flag football college rec team. And so one of the guys who lived next door to me, one of my best friends, his name's Jason, he came up to me and was like, yo, these girls want me to coach them for flag football. Is there any way that you can help out? And so I really got sucked in the first year. And the first year, we got crushed. I mean, we were like 0-8 or something like that, and bloody fingers and girls giving up, and us coaches being frustrated and trying to figure it out. But both Jason and I were the type of guys that were just like, we're just going to hit the drawing board and try to come with the best thing we could offer forward for each game. And every game we just got crushed. And at the end of the season, we thought, okay, cool. We did them a favor. We practiced and played with them throughout the season. We coached them. We did the best that we can do. I'm sure these girls don't want to play at all. And sure enough, at the end of the season, they give Jason and I some gifts and beg us to come back for another season. And I'm like, these girls just must like just being, having adversity. And so we begrudgingly agreed to it, and so along went our trials and tribulations, but also small victories and eventually success, until a point in which we started dominating that competition. And it took us about 2 or 3 years to figure things out, and we tweaked it time by time, but eventually, maybe after the 4th year, it was hard for us to be beat, and sometimes hard for us to be scored upon. And I think in that 15-year span, we won about 9 championships, and that's within the school locally, and then regionally against other conferences, colleges within our conference. We won, I want to say, 3 championships, beating one team that hadn't lost in 6 years and hadn't been scored on in 4 years. So it was kind of a journey, right? And it's kind of a journey. And so after 15 years of that, I had a blast. I said, all right, I'm going to retire. I'm done. I kind of kicked my shoes off and moved from like the Orange County area up to LA. And about 3 years into my retirement, I met a gal who was a female quarterback, and she quarterbacked in a men's league, and she quarterbacked in a co-ed league. And she approached me and said, hey, her coach had kind of left, and she'd heard a little bit from one of my former players that I had coached, and she brought me onto a team called She Unit, which 50, if you're out there, we could definitely use some support, man. That G Unit.
Looking for sponsorship?
You know what I'm saying? That She Unit connection. That's what,
She Unit.
That's what we do. That's our cheer. You got it, bro. So, but yeah, so she invited me out, and I went to one tournament, and you know how you you fall in love with the thing that you already in love with. That's what I felt like when I came back, man. I had all like goosebump feelings. I couldn't sleep the night before the tournament happened, and we were right back at it. And we've had some really fun success in that team. That team gave me the exposure to be recognized out in Vegas at a international tournament by the creator and founder of Women's Flag Football Network. His name's Norman Carter, and just through our interactions and seeing me coach and having a couple of meetings off the field, we were able to connect in a way in which he thought that I would be a good asset to a team that was being formed called the Women's Flag Football Network USA team. And so that happened last year. We're almost coming up on a year of the inception of that team, and I'm the head coach there. We've got a great coaching staff. Chris Langford out of Texas. This guy's won, I want to say, maybe more national titles than I have fingers on my on my hands. And he coaches a women's team called Adrenaline here in the States. A couple of other different variations of names too as well. And then we've got a coach out of Maryland, DC area called Glenn Bell. One of the best defensive coaches I've ever been able to work with, and he coaches a team called Capital Punishment, CP, and these guys, they're national champs locally, but we go out and we compete internationally versus countries all over the world, and 3 different formats, and it's an absolute blast. We've been pretty blessed.
That's dope.
The thing about this for me is understanding that this is like it's huge. I mean, it's international. Like, do you get sponsorship? Like, how many teams are there in the States, and how many leagues are there in the States? And then, what's that landscape look like internationally? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Especially for any listener who's interested in getting into flag football.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the flag football game in the U.S. is huge. There's thousands of leagues across the board for both men's and women's, and the men's leagues have really picked up so much in a way that I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's a tournament that takes place now. It started last year where people are competing with pros and former pros in a tournament to win $1 million. And and so the NFL Network has picked it up, and they broadcast it. You can catch a bunch of the games. Fighting Cancer was a team that won last year. They're out of Louisiana, and so they compete year round in the circuit. And I play on a men's league that kind of competes year round on the circuit. But the women's game is also in that same vein. It just has not had as much traction in the national sense as we've seen it have in the international sense. But within the Women's Flag Football Network, there's, again, thousands and thousands of women's teams in the U.S. Who predominantly play an 8-on-8 contact, but there's also 7-on-7 non-contact and 5-on-5 non-contact, and those are the main 3. And for that, when you're talking about the tournaments, you got sponsorships that range from Adidas, Nike, Gatorade. I don't know if that new sports drink Body Armor has got into it, but I know that we're open to having conversations with them if they're interested. but yeah, we've got some girls that are sponsored by different companies and organizations. We got one girl that's sponsored by Adidas. She actually was on ESPN. Her name's Michelle Rowe. She has a pretty sick clip. She's out of Florida, and
I know. Yes, I know exactly who she is. Her highlight reel is silly.
She's got a silly highlight reel. So she's awesome. I think actually the first play from scrimmage that she was on the USA team. She ran back. She did a cutback dive and hit it for a 62-yard touchdown or something like that on the first play. It was pretty nice. But yeah, that's how the sponsorships work kind of nationally. And then internationally, teams are sponsored by so many different companies internationally too as well. And so we've got a number of tournaments coming up. I think one that will be huge in October of 2019 is our Nassau Bahamas tournament, which is kind of cool. We get to go to the Bahamas, and also we get to play against different countries and so on and so forth. And then every 2 years, it's kind of like an opportunity for us to jump into like a World Cup aspect, and that's for the 5-on-5s. Last I guess a year ago, we were in Panama. The USA team representative there was in Panama for 5s, and we won a world championship there, beating Panama, which is a very good team. But Panama, Mexico, all these teams, you think that their game is football, like the soccer, but they're
I was going to ask, what's the
actual
international
football.
competition? Because American football, from what I would presume or assume, probably incorrectly, that American football is just not that big in the rest of the world. So flag football would follow the same suit, but no.
Yeah, no, I was definitely surprised. In the 8-on-8 game where there's contact, we have the advantage. But when they get there and when they start to acclimate to the 8-on-8, they're going to be right there with us. But in the 5-on-5 and 7-on-7s games, the pitch game is so prevalent, and so you have a lot of teams that are shifty and fast and very cerebral, and they're aware of spacing, and they pitch well. And we were in Mexico. Outside Mexico City. Probably one of the biggest tournaments that we've been in, and their whole town and city gets up for these games and for these tournaments. And
really?
Yeah, it's so cool. And one quick story about our ladies there. There was a girl that we have that she goes with us. She's a wonderful lady. Her name's Jo Overstreet, and she does a lot for the community, for women's flag game and so on and so forth. But when she goes to spaces and places across the world, there are like little groupies that are there following her, just because her personality.
The
player. She's infectious. She's just she's approachable. She's kind, and she's an amazing athlete. She's got the Odell Beckham style mohawk going on with the bleach tips and so on and so forth, and she can make all the catches and all the moves like that too, as well as a receiver. But I remember one time we were just about to end a game, and coach was finishing up talking for their team and so on and so forth, and the next thing you know, 5 people just kind of show up out of like stage left, and just like, come on, let's go. And her little groupies go. So it's kind of neat.
That's
fine. The community for flag is infectious. I know I kissed a lot of babies over the journey of my tournaments. The parents and everyone that's around, because the age range kind of for our adult league, it goes from 18. We got 40-plus-year-olds playing, and it's cool to be a part of it too as well.
Do you think any of it has to do with the fact that it's just like you mentioned that she's approachable? Do you think the game is just more approachable? Like more people feel like they can participate either personally or like Yes, and babe, like they can actually interact with you and the players versus like NFL or anything like that. It's just there's such a gap.
Absolutely that. And speaking of the gap, the space when you're on a sideline for a flag football game or a tournament, you're about 6 yards away from where all the action's happening. You're almost just as close as the players are, you know. And some of the tournaments, you are just as close as the players are if the refs don't say anything. And so that automatically it erases any wall that there might be in terms of there being, you know, a distance between it. And so I know a lot of players, we engage, we do things to try to get the crowd pumped up and involved. And my Killam Plam days when I was, you know, and I had a non-torn ACL over here, and I was a little bit lighter in the feed and younger. I used to carry for a couple of games a Sharpie in my socks, and I would
Terrell.
And I did this before Terrell actually, which is crazy. So this was like 2002, and I think Terrell did it like many years after that or something like that, right? So yeah, this was like 2001 or 2002, and so one day my mom was there, and she came and visited. She kind of flew in from Northern California, and sure enough, I score a touchdown on a kick return, and I get the Sharpie out. I sign the ball, I hand it to her. My friend gets it on tape, and it's pretty cool. So that stuff is just a part of the flag game, right? You're able to do things that, you know, we don't have a lot of huge like penalties for celebrations and things like that. You can just have a blast.
So, one thing that comes to mind in this, it's interesting is that, or I'm curious, what is the ratio of male to female coaches, and especially with, you know, being a male coaching female flag football? It's fascinating to me, considering, you know, we continue to try to get females into the
coaching realm,
and yet, you know,
kind of makes sense though, given, I mean, how many opportunities are there for women to play football outside of flag? So, like from the knowledge base standpoint.
Yeah, but I'm just curious
I think that's
about the culture and how that plays out. Like, it's a non-judgment question.
No, I think the question's great, and I think Rodney really points out one of the key factors why you would see a lot of male coaches is, you know, in the beginning process of learning the game, a lot of women would be reaching out to males to just kind of get familiar with the game, and I've seen as their game has advanced, some women players are like, okay, I think I am prepared enough now to take on this challenge and to step up into a role that looks, you know, more familiar to a coaching role. And so I know out of Atlanta, we got a couple different, you know, owners and coaches of teams that are out there. One of the team's names is Reloaded, and Charmaine's the coach out there, and she's incredible. She's actually also is connected to one of our players on the Women's Flag Football Network USA team, and so she's come out and offered great insight in regards to strategy and things like that for our coaching staff. But there are women out there coaching or leading teams where there's player coaches. You'll see that a lot in the women's game, especially nationally, where you'll have 16 girls out there led by either their captain QB or their captain linebacker, and they run a well knit, put together system, and are very hard to beat because most of the time when they're coaching in that aspect, these ladies have been playing together for many years. So
do you see it? You see it on the rise now that the ecosystems have been around longer.
Yeah, as soon as they get comfortable enough with being able to make those calls and not feel like they've got to just focus on playing, then that's when you see it start to adjust and bend. And then in terms of the coaching aspect, in my opinion, I think it's always better to have a coach removed from being a player only because then you can play within that role that you have as an athlete, and the coach can play within that role, and then anything that you do in the game that's coach like, your thought process, your anticipation and stuff like that, then you implement those things, and those teams seem to have the most success, in my opinion.
Well, Rodney and I are former flag football champions at Biola University.
Still got my shirt.
Let them know.
we were player coaches.
Yeah.
We were player
Safeties,
coaches.
Safety extraordinaire.
We set it up, and that team was.
It was a situation though where so the year prior, like the talent on the team was stupid.
Right.
Like several people on the team should have been on the
college team. Yeah.
And the practice squad.
Right.
And like, or not should have is not the word. It is possible that they could have made the squad.
Right.
And so, but we went out and like put together a horrible season. We're like, what is going on? And Keith and I started talking, and we were looking at it. It's like everybody wanted to do everything. And so we were like, all right, we're going to call a practice. We're going to be coaches. We're going to organize the play. Like, we're going to do what the coaches do. Like, we're going to organize your quarterback, you're a receiver. You can throw the ball, but you're the receiver because you're the best receiver on the team. And, like, we put everybody in roles, and it was like, and we actually were somewhat concerned about it at first because it's, like, a lot of very outspoken, talented,
Type A personalities.
Type A individuals, and we're like, how are they going to respond to, like, these two dudes being like, all right, we're coaching y'all up. And they snapped to it. And then we just went undefeated. Like, it was.
So let's go back to the let's take a trip in the way back machine. It's fun talking about.
Wait, I have a question real quick
before we do that.
Yeah, just something I like to ask, like, because I'm very literal. So referring to women, sometimes girls, sometimes ladies, like, and I do this. Everybody does it. Like, how we refer to women is very different, and I think it's different for different reasons. Do you have a thought on it? Have you had a conversation with any women about it?
So I have a thought on it, and in general, I think the language is a lot of times is built within the context of the person that you're speaking to, and so when you're speaking on a large platform to people who might be all across the world, it will vary as to how people receive the statement that you're saying, and so if you're writing it down, it has no tone, right? If you're speaking it vocally, and then they may be able to hear the tone of the context of the situation. And so whatever word you're using, if you're speaking it, make sure the context and the tone is in a way in which is respectable to all situations. For myself, I've had conversations with people who, if you call them women or you call them ladies, they're great with it, but if you call them a girl, they might be offended by that. And I've had some that'll say like, hey, all of those three things are true about me, and it really matters on how, like, if you're trying to demean me by that statement, and so on and so forth. And so I really just try to keep my ears open, and I share those words, whichever one I use, in love. And if for some reason it's not received in love, I'm able to pick up those things pretty well, and can switch the language and change the language to what they might be more happy with.
If you say, like, girl is the big one, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially nowadays. I mean, generally speaking, we don't refer to guys as boys. It's guys as men, right?
Yeah.
If you sense that, like, do you call it out or acknowledge it so it doesn't linger, maybe in their mind, even if you shift your tone and approach, or?
Yeah, it depends on how tense the situation is, right? So if I said the word girl, and I felt like, it was a slight, like, I don't know if I'd use that, and then I might just switch the language to, like, women or female or ladies or so on and so forth, and see if that's smooth or whatever. If I feel like there was, like, a more, like, excuse me, or, well, that's definitely a direct way, but if I felt like it was a little bit more intense, like, you know what, girl may have not been the best word to use there. Would we say women? And, like, just kind of engage with that person. Would we say, ladies? And then and go from there. But I think it's more like training within my own mind to be aware if it, it could be taken in an offensive way. Go ahead, Rodney. Sorry.
I've been on teams. There's been plenty of teams I've been on where it's like, all right, boys, we got this. Like, let's go. Whereas, if I was called a boy in just my general daily life, like, I wouldn't be cool with that.
Right.
Depending on who said it and how they said
Right.
it. But like in that context, do you think any of it has to do with the culture of sports or teams or the team that you're coaching at the moment?
Certainly that, yeah. So I think culture has played a role in it. The team aspect has a role in it. But those all speak to the tone. They all speak to the context of the situation, right?
Yeah.
So like if someone just saw me on the street, it's like, boy, come on over here. Like, whoa.
Yeah. Wait a second. Time out.
But if it's like me and I'm like, what's up, my boy? Like,
right. But if it's a collective, right, and I'm like, all right, girls, we're coming over, we're coming this way. We're like, all right, ladies. Like if I'm interchanging that and we're like running a drill or something like that, nobody's really thinking about, in my experience, that I've had engagement with or I felt like they were offended by it. Me saying girls plural to them in reference to the fact that we're going to jump into this drill now. But again, if that were ever the case, we are very, I'm very much willing to say, all right, let's switch that from girl to ladies or ladies to women and so on and so forth. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting too, because in your example, Rodney, let's go boys, you will often hear the corollary amongst female groups. All right, girls, like girl party, girls trip.
Like when you're in the group.
But when you're in the group, like you're part of it versus a man referring to a female or a woman as a girl, right? And what I find interesting too, and then I have a question, is in that context we hear it a lot, but in like corporate context or business or social or casual context, you will hear girl far more than you'll hear boy, right? And so then it leads to the question, because I love your approach to self-awareness and self-action. What do you think about just not saying it at all versus having to navigate the nuance of each situation?
Yeah, I mean, if someone were to not say it at all and they were to kind of strike it out of their language, I think that would probably be up to that own individual in terms of they've come to the conscious decision. I don't think, now, again, I'm not trying to be insensitive to this scenario, but I don't think the word is as triggering to the female population as, let's say, the N-word would be to the black population, right? I don't think it's in that same vein or world or in context and the way that you're saying it.
For sure.
Yeah, right. But I would, you made that statement about when the girls are saying it, it's all like celebratory and they're all with it. But if it comes from a guy's point, like I think if Jay-Z had made the song that his wife Beyonce made, "Who Runs the World, Girls," it would have been kind of weird, right? It would have been like,
for a lot of reasons.
Who run it?
But I can sing it. Like that's a big difference between.
But yeah.
So I have a question. So almost you bring up the N-word or not a question, a thought. Like let's talk through this. So I thought about this a lot growing up because my mom brought it up, which is the part of the reason why I'm so freaking literal.
Right.
But like, she's like, yeah, don't use the word girl. Like people don't call you a boy, or they call you a young man or a young woman or a young girl. Like, and the disparity is so, especially in corporate, or I would say just general. Like take sports. Let's take sports as a unique case. Or maybe not. Let's just leave it. There's a thing in the world and culture where it's almost just saying, yeah, not quite equal. Like, you're a man and I respect that. You're a girl. And like, because they literally mean different things. And it's not necessarily a conscious decision. Like, I don't think that the individual saying it is trying to say, however, this has permeated culture so much that I think it's just a thing. Like, we just don't see them as equal, men, girls. Like, we just don't, and we don't even realize it. It's so subconscious that we just kind of do it. And so, like, maybe striking it and saying, hey, you know what? Like, she works here at blah, 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 corp. Like, she's a woman. Like, she's a grown woman. Like, just like and this has some tones of being a black man, but, like, if somebody were to call me a boy at work, I would lose my shit. Like, I would not be okay with that.
Right.
And this is, like, I think you bring up a great point, Q, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those situations. I think it's elevated itself. Nothing will elevate to the N-word, really, right? So we're not talking about that elevation, but it's elevated itself enough to the general social consciousness that, you know, we all have this conversation. But at the same time, I think you bring up the good point. Like a lot of these situations, it's not necessarily going to bother a lot of people, and it's going to bother a lot of other people, right?
Yep.
And I think this is where that collective communication and connection to say, if every single part of my day I'm around a group of female flag football players, who all use the word girl interchangeably. I am part of that culture. I use the word girl interchangeably. It just becomes part of my lexicon. Right.
But going back to the corporate world, like Rodney's saying, in that scenario, there might be a situation, because I'm not engaged in that scenario in the corporate setting all the time. Like, my corporate setting's a smaller nonprofit, you know, very, very easy to engage with. When I'm engaging with people from other nonprofits, I don't use the word girl, right? It's not common. It's not commonly used, because if I'm talking to them, I'm probably just talking about, you know, contracts or solutions towards ending homelessness or things of that nature. But if it is used in a corporate setting in a demeaning way, often in a way in which the corporate setting is set up already to give disparity to the female population, then it is something that needs to be examined, challenged. Conversations need to be sparked around that and engaged with. And whether we're doing it subconsciously or consciously, there is an effect that's taking place. And I think more people in the corporate setting would be aware of that. I don't think it would be an elephant in the room. I think they would be aware of that concept. Yeah.
And I think what to that transition, right, is you use this in your general, like, in something that you do all the time. You may end up saying it, right? Just because it's part of what you do. And you don't mean it in any other way other than this is your background. Like, this is what you've got going on in your daily life. And I think this is where it becomes really important, is to say, hey, Q, what'd you mean by girl? Right? Like to not, it doesn't have to be, you know, Q needs to go, you know, he's demeaning me and subjugating me and making me feel less than. Let's ask the intent, right? Like, what do you mean by that? Why? I've never heard you say that before. Why are you referring to her as a girl, or even calling me a girl, depending on the dynamics of the situation, right?
Yeah, and those type of conversations are difficult to have, right? And most of the time we get to these situations where we're just like Xing out words or Xing out phrases or Xing out all those things because either we're not trained in a way or we're not comfortable in a way to ask the next pressing question, to ask the next difficult question, to clarify what that the word was intended to be, right? And so because it's harder to dive deeper into that type of conversation, we then just put up these walls around different things that we can or cannot do, which I'm not using this analogy to say I should be able to say girl or this or that and the other, but I'm just saying separate from that, we do have an issue around kind of diffusing what may not necessarily have been something intended to like bring harm or shame.
Was
people.
this actually intended to harm or instead we just throw up like no.
He's gone.
Can't say.
For the rest of my life.
We give everything the N-word treatment essentially.
We do.
Like can't say it. Like no, this is a very different word. Like this is so.
And I think
said now, not cow. You thought he said cow, but he said now, and now you think that he was calling you fat, and now it's over. It's a wrap.
No more cows. You can't say cow. Can't say cow here. But we're a dairy.
And I think it just speaks so much to the need to figure out how to effectively do that, you in your nonprofit, we'll get into the whole nature of it, but you have a 101, like a communication 101. Within that, like, how do you, I think this is super relevant to the nature of our podcast. How do you help people feel more comfortable, even if they don't use the right words, they're choked up, their stomach's churning, but they need to say it, right? Like, they need to navigate that regardless of the response. Like, how do you help people do that?
Yeah, so I think for us, we are in our training, we talk a lot about just practicing a posture. And one of one of the things I said earlier,
as I straighten up
in terms of diffusing situations, a word that I used earlier was like gentleness. And I think if we have an approach of gentleness, it really allows for someone to be in a space where they're going to be kind with their words and in their heart towards whoever it is. So if they're afraid to make the question or statement, or if they feel offended by something in that way, even their response is going to be a response in gentleness. The other thing that we talk about a lot is we use these two words joined together, grace and truth, in a lot of what we do. And so we try to, in our approach to engaging with people, we try to have a spirit of grace in everything that we do. And
what does that mean?
So,
like, what is
grace would be like kind of an undeserved forgiveness towards someone. It's like a gift that you're going to give to someone. And I'm going to give. I'm going to believe in the best of that person. I'm going to trust in the best of that person. I'm going to give them the gift of my attention, my respect, my love, my forgiveness, even if they don't yet deserve it, right? That's kind of the grace, and kind of a little modeled off of what, like, the grace that God gives to us. And then the truth of the matter is that two parts. One of it is what's true to their experience or what's true to their feelings. So they might be, experiencing something that they felt offended by, or they might be wanting to share to that other person, that, secondhand smoke kills, right? So there might be a truth that they give you, or drinking and driving can lead to fatalities. That might be a truth that they're giving, but they're also giving that combined with this aspect of grace. And I think the thing that we talk about a lot when trying to make sure that you implement both of those things is we ask people to look inside themselves, because oftentimes we live in a society that we like to point the finger at someone else, and we'll definitely jump on someone else if they've done something wrong and so on and so forth, and we can talk for days if, like, look what that president did, can you believe that he did that? Or look what that priest did over there, can you believe? Or that CEO of that company. But we don't oftentimes go introspective with ourselves and recognize that there's some ugliness within our own self that we did on the 405 freeway when it was jam-packed and we were trying to get to work or trying to get to that location. I heard what you said underneath your breath. And so we just, like, let's be real. Can we be real with ourselves first? Can we really recognize that we're not as high as we like to think we are? And then from that point, it goes, okay, all right, if we're humans and we're fallible and we make mistakes and we don't get everything right, then when we approach someone else, can we be gentle with them, and can we share with them in truth with grace wrapped around that? And that's what we try to do with our.
How do you get people to look inside? Because I would agree for sure, but it's scary, bro. Like you take the hood off, start looking inside your head, and often it's a mess. It's like, what did I just think that? Did I just say that? Like, well, how do you urge people to start?
So one way I urge people to start the process, and again, we're a doer type of people. When we train, we like to put actions into it. So if myself or someone's training in that regards, if we want someone else to look inside, we just basically look inside ourselves in front of them, which is kind of a vulnerable place to be, right? And so I lift up the curtain, and you get to see all the cobwebs and the spiders and the ugliness come out, and through that, it sparks an opportunity for someone to be like, you know what, I can be vulnerable in this space. And the environment and the space has to be presented in a way that works, and it doesn't always work at every training. It doesn't always work in every setting, but you create an opportunity to give yourself the best opportunity for us to grow. And just like in our lives, sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, in my case, 20,000 trainings to be able to go, all right, I can grow a little bit there, right? And even after I grow, there's still areas that I need to grow in. I might regress, I might shrink down for, a moment or two in life, but there's still opportunity for it to go. And the only way to do that is to just keep being transparent and available and raw and authentic and right in their face with it.
I think you really represent something that we talk about with our structures of conversation, and that is, it's hard. It's hard for you.
Yeah.
It's hard for me.
Yeah.
And if it's hard for you and it's hard for me, why don't we make it easier for each other rather than make it harder for each other? Right? Like, recognizing the fact that whatever it is your life experience brings you to do something that you're going to do, and whatever experience that my life brings to do something I'm going to do, like, knowing that the journeys, the tribulation, like, it's not day to day, it's hard, and it's hard to interact and try. Just try then, because you're both probably coming at it with maybe not the same, but potentially a similar perspective and difficulty, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about your nonprofit a little bit. Let's get into, like, what are you doing? Like, how are you doing it? What are you doing? How'd you get into it? Why?
All of that. Like, where did you come from that brought you to that place, like, through football and all that? So.
Right. So, man, that's a journey in itself. So, I was young. I was raised, for the most part, in a single home. My mother, my brother, and I, for most of our years. And my mother's phenomenal. I know everybody's mom is phenomenal, but my mom just happens to be the most phenomenal of all of that. So it's putting it out there, no disrespect to all those mothers.
She'll
out
appreciate
there.
You're a guest. I'm not going to argue.
All those mothers out there.
I'm not going to argue because you're a guest.
But my mama.
We'll let you win that battle,
right,
just because you're the guest.
So, by the grace of God, my mom was approached by one of her teachers, and the approach was not by the grace of God, but my mom's response, rather. And she was approached by a teacher.
Or maybe it was.
Right. But her teacher said something so shocking and so profound back in the early 80s that kind of just leaves me perplexed. But she actually suggested that my mom get an abortion. She suggested that, or she said, that you'll end up on the streets, or you'll end up with kids in the system, and so on and so forth. And she chose not to do that.
She was pregnant with you or your brother?
Yes, yeah, myself. And so I I credit a lot of the resilience that my mother had in that terms to really be able to kind of persevere through that journey. And the task was not easy for her. She was very young when she had my brother and I. We grew up, all three of us, together, but she's resilient, and so our childhood looked a little bit differently. We still, played in the sand and went and had fun and did these things, but we grew up a little faster. And part of our time we spent with her in her college years. She went to college in a year and a time in which we were, old enough to figure things out and navigate things around. And so we went through the JC program with her. We went through the undergrad program with her. And then when we were a little bit older, we were definitely...
JC, junior college.
Junior college, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when we were older, because she kind of got them all in succession, we were in her master's program. And her master's program was a program of social work. And so we would be back in those days. It was okay to bring your kids to school, so we'd be in some of the classes, some of the night classes, and so on and so forth, at the social work level. And I felt like, as a kid, I got a degree myself in social work from early on.
You were auditing the classes, basically.
Right. Early on, that was before my college history, and so that kind of set me into that world of social work without me even realizing that I'd be about social justice and stuff like that.
A quick aside,
yeah,
that it was okay to bring kids to school back then. I feel it seems that
is it not okay today at night school?
That's a good question. I haven't seen a lot of kids while I was in school, while I was in college. At night school, I didn't see a lot of them in the classes, day or night in that aspect. But a lot of colleges have now, the daycare centers and stuff like that. And so,
I didn't know.
They have a lot more of those now. So I'm not really seeing a lot of kids going to the actual classroom. And then if they don't have the daycare center, I'm seeing a lot of parents take their kids to a daycare center somewhere nearby until they can finish up the courses and stuff like that. So that was a little bit of our aspect. And growing up, we were on government assistance for like 13 years of our lives, so we were on welfare. So there was an aspect of learning the social justice aspect of the social work, living the social justice aspect of social help, and so on and so forth. So I was very familiar with it. I was familiar with people's experience in it. I experienced it myself. I experienced situations of not having a home, and having to move from one city to live with the grandparents and so on and so forth. I've experienced kind of all of those different arrays, and I think it kind of really helped shape a passion for me in this field itself. So that's the first question I think you asked.
Yeah.
So, quick digression before we get to the nonprofit. So, welfare for 13 years. How do you feel about the vilification of welfare?
Whew, man, I will say this. There's already a ton of, well, not for everyone. For myself and for our family, there was a bit of embarrassment in terms of having to be on welfare. I remember back in the day, they had the food stamps, not like the EBT cards, like the actual Monopoly money paper or stuff like that. And it wasn't my brother really wasn't a fan of taking that to the grocery store. And so I became the kind of the grocery shopper and the couponer in the journey. I'm like, all right, I'll take on the task, because when you go to the register and you give them, the food stamp or the money and stuff like that, there's just a look that is being given to you, or a feeling, and it could be internalized. It could be also something that they're actually doing, which there are situations where both those things occur. And so that's just, I think, again, if we approach people with gentleness in every scenario, or a little bit of patience, a little bit of love, then it would have erased the feeling or the stigma of that. And so I don't think it's helpful to be a villain against the welfare program or the government program. And at the same time, which is a very different question, I think it's always helpful to be able to improve ways in which people can grow into economic wealth and stability and things of that nature. And I don't think the two have to work in union. Being a villain and also and that being a villain is actually improving the social economic system. Because I think a lot of times people villainize things because they don't want that thing, a particular part of that thing to occur. For example, let's say people who are abusing the welfare system, they don't want the abuse of the welfare system to occur. Therefore, they talk crap about it and they villainize it and so on and so forth. All of those things aren't actually going to improve the very thing that you want to see improved. And so if you use your energy in a different way, in a more constructive way, as opposed to just being a villain towards it, I think you'd have a lot more success. I guess that'd be my take on the situation.
The nonprofit.
So our nonprofit's called Broken Hearts Ministry. We actually just started as a group of college kids that were interested in coming into the LA area and caring for those that were living and working on the streets, some experiencing homelessness. Our first approach was seeing if we could look towards caring for those that were in the female population within sex trafficking and prostitution and so on and so forth. And our actual approach and our scope expanded beyond that. And so we like to say that we serve all of those that are experiencing brokenness. And brokenness, we say, looks differently no matter where you're at. So whether you're housed or home, you can have an experience of brokenness. Whether you're living in addiction or whether you're experiencing mental health concerns, you can experience a bit of brokenness. You could be in a Fortune 500 company and just balling out of out of your mind, and you could still be experiencing that brokenness. And the common thing for us is that we like to say that we've all experienced some type of brokenness in our life, some way, shape, or form. And who wouldn't love to have some justice? Some restorative justice put back into their lives. And so that's really our charge, to be out there to make all things new and to bring a wholeness to a situation that maybe looks a little bleak, or maybe makes them feel like they've been disqualified or they're in deep despair, and to bring a life and a newness and a wholeness into their situation through conversations that we have, through kind of connecting the dots, bridging the gap between resources that they might need and availability that we have, and also just bringing the grace and truth of the gospel to the community right on the streets. And so for us, what it looks like on an everyday basis is, the 9 to 5 time is a lot of resource building. So if folks are looking for housing, job, employment, things of that nature, teams are working both on the streets and in the offices towards that. We have a very awesome event every Thursday night called the Refuge Service, and that's when the community meets in Hollywood, and we do a church service on the streets there for our whole community. We do a meal together there, and on the very last Thursday of the month, we do free laundry for anyone and everyone that wants to come on through, whether housed or unhoused, and a really big home cooked meal and a band and all the whole 9 yards. And so we'll have 50 to 100 people there celebrating in Hollywood and having a good time. To just hang out and enjoy each other and enjoy each other's company and so on and so forth. And we really feel like for that type of event, it creates some stability and some routine and some commonality to things that our community was once familiar with before they maybe were impacted with the situation that led them to the streets. And one of those things being like the church community. Because some of our friends who are living and working on the streets, they've kind of gone away from the traditional Sunday service where they're in the walls and they're there day in and day out, because maybe they feel like they're a little bit different than the people that are in the normal traditional Sunday setting and so on and so forth. And so we bring them out there on Thursday. We create that environment and we say, no, Sunday's for you too as well, just as much as it is for anyone else that's sitting in those seats. And so we connect the churches back to the community as well. That may have wanted to do that and be a part of it and stuff like that. So that's a little bit about what we do.
How long have you been operating?
15 years. 15 years, yeah. So
no small thing, because there's a lot of nonprofits in LA. That's not a small thing at all. Like, 'cause it's not easy to keep a nonprofit's doors open and then
No.
15 years. That's commendable.
To be a volunteer when you're the executive director of a nonprofit after 15 years, and you serve
Right.
people who are really, really hard on their luck, right? Like from what you're saying, like those are hard stories that a lot of people can't or have a hard time interacting with. And obviously, you've been there in a certain fashion, but like, how do you maintain that spirit? Like, you're a positive guy, you know.
That's a great question. I'll tell you this: like when it was at the climax of certain things not going well for our organization, and you asked me that question back then.
Different answer.
I don't. That was what I would have said. I mean, I'm real, right? I'm human.
Yeah.
Like we got the wind taken out of us. You know, we got our butts kicked. But if you're able to, in any scenario where you're getting kicked or defeated for a good work that you're doing, if you're able to pause and just note the effects that it's having either on, the people around you, your loved ones, your clients, yourself, maybe more like relationally, spiritually, that can give you the motivation to continue to persevere in whatever that you may be able to persevere in. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to like struggle through something that just isn't supposed to work, and maybe you got to move on and do some other things. But for me, one of the things that was really cool is we'd show up and to grab some mail or something, and there'd be like a card in there from one of our community members, and it would be like, hey, I just want to thank the Broken Hearts team for all the work that you guys have been doing. It's been 3 weeks since I've been in my house, and here's a picture of what I've put up here, and it's got like one of our, like a Bible from our Bible study or something like that, or it's got like some movie tickets because we took them out to the movies to just like go hang out and stuff like that, and it'll just have it in their handwriting, and it will like a special. They'll share a special story about our engagement with them. They'll typically invite us over, and we'll go over and eat food, and sometimes we say we like it even if it's not that good.
It's called being polite. That's all. There's honesty, and then there's being polite, right?
It's just at a point, and then
what is this? Spaghetti? No, it's fish.
Right. And so it's, that's encouragement, right? Or you see someone light up, or they ask you a certain question, when you're having a conversation, or you're doing a counseling session with someone, whether that be through the relationships that they're going through or the trauma they've experienced in their life, and you're able to engage them in a way that you see breakthrough. It's just great. And so then for me, it was just like, all right, so I have that, and I got to figure out how to balance, like, keeping light bills on and living life and so on and so forth. So that was the persevering, is figuring out like what has to be implemented in order to continue to strive and move forward, and is there a way in which that thing that is implemented can finance the very thing that I love and I'm passionate about, and so on and so forth. And that's the journey that I'm on now. It's just discovering how those worlds can meet. So yeah.
You mentioned you've done it actually a couple of times, and I've heard one other person would do this. Community members. You don't say like homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing it's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming it's intentional.
It's very intentional.
And the first time I heard it was probably 4 months ago now. Somebody was like, "Well, why are we running an event for the homeless? Like, aren't they people?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? Like, aren't we just having an event for people to come to? Like, and this, like, they may be down on their luck. They may not have a house. They may not, but whatever. Like, is that who they are? Like, like they're homeless? Like that's how you define them?
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of got me thinking, like, man, like how much of the problem is because we don't see them as people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're just people, yo. Like,
mm-hmm.
and and Keith and I have talked about this a lot. We've talked about it with a couple guests. That's this thing that happens where when you name a group of people something, and then basically it just puts up a barrier for you to say that couldn't be me, whether it be in reference to the Nazis, or be in reference to black people, or be in reference to homeless. Like, well, I'm safe. Like, I'm not. Like, I can see a discrete difference between me and that group. I'm not them. And it seems like I think, if I'm counting, I think you've done it like 3 or 4 times. Our community members are.
Or if I say the word homeless, but one of the things that we try to do, and people within our community we try to do, is we say people who are experiencing homelessness are, so that it's, people first, and then something that people would be able to relate to. They are currently without home. Or we'll also say that people who are currently without home. And people, it normally slows them down and goes, what? Like, currently without home? What is he saying? He's like, yeah, we got to use the English. We got to use the English sentence structure here, people.
It's not.
Do you think part of that, like,
some people are doing, and that's so, yeah.
Q, as much as I regret to have to end this conversation at this point, for the sake of time, we're going to have to let you go for today. But before we do, we always like to ask, is there something, if there was one thing that you could leave, or is there one thing that you would like to leave with our guests, or with our listeners?
Man, I think the thing that I would leave with your listeners is to be relational in your approach to life. I think I'll leave them with that.